So if you've ever tried to capture night lapses with the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, then you've likely encountered the 1 second problem. If you haven't encountered that problem before, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. And then most importantly, I'm going to show you a solution to the 1 second problem. And I'm going to show you how to capture incredible night lapses using the Pocket 3. By the way, it's a really windy day today. I love being outside to film, and I'm here under some trees, so if I suddenly take off running, it's because I hear a tree snapping. So traditionally, the best method for capturing night lapses on a camera with a smaller sensor, such as the Pocket 3, or action cameras, or smartphone cameras, is to set the shutter speed manually. And typically, you're gonna set that manual shutter speed to about 15 seconds, all the way up to about 30 seconds. Somewhere in the 15 to 30 second range is generally the sweet spot for capturing a good night lapse that has a lot of stars in it. Having a slower shutter speed is preferable to bumping up the ISO, because when you bump up the ISO, you're simply adjusting your camera's sensitivity to light. And once you get that ISO up to 800, 1600, or beyond on these smaller sensors, you're going to get a ton of digital noise and grain. And when you're capturing a night lapse, that's especially bad because that noise and grain is going to start to mix with the stars in the sky. And you're going to be able to tell what's noise and grain because as the stars rotate in the sky, that noise and grain is not going to rotate and it's going to be distracting and it's just gonna simply look bad. You don't want that. So on the Pocket 3, if you go into the time-lapse mode and you go to set the shutter speed manually to 15 seconds or 30 seconds, you're going to encounter a very unpleasant surprise. And that surprise is that you can only go as slow as 1 second with the shutter speed. Yes, a measly 1 second. 1 second is basically worthless for night lapses. The only time where it might be useful is if you're in a big city with a lot of city lights and your specific focus for the night lapse is to show those lights. That is where 1 second might be fine. But if you're trying to capture stars or any details in the sky at nighttime, that 1 second is not going to get you anywhere. Even if you bump up the ISO to a ridiculously high value, it's going to end up looking really bad because of that digital noise and grain. And it's still not going to capture that many details. I know because I've tried. So if you're like me and you want to capture amazing night lapses of stars in the sky, here's how you do it. First of all, make sure you're in time-lapse mode. Once you're in time-lapse mode, swipe up and select time-lapse. And also up here in the upper right, make sure you're in 4K 30 first or 4K 25 if you don't live in the United States. You wanna be in that 4K because you wanna capture the very highest resolution. So I'm in the United States, so I'm going to do 4K 30. And then down here, make sure to select custom. And then what we're gonna do next is we're gonna swipe up to set our parameters. And what we wanna do here is we wanna select 30 seconds for the interval. And when I'm doing a night lapse, I usually just set the video duration to infinity. And that's because I simply want this to go all night. I want it to go from sunset to sunrise. And what I do is I have a power bank here from Anker. And this power bank, I just plug it in via the USB-C connection, and it's more than enough to power my Pocket 3 all night. So once we've set that interval, we're gonna swipe back down, and then we're going to swipe in from the left. So traditionally, like I talked about, what we wanna do is we wanna set the shutter speed manually. But as you'll see, when we start scrolling down here, this is where we encounter the 1 second problem. Now, of course, during the daytime, 1 second is super overexposed, and that's not going to give us any footage in the daytime. But at nighttime, this screen right here would basically be completely dark when looking at the night sky. And sure, we can bump up ISO like I mentioned earlier. You can go all the way up to 6400. But trust me, those results are utterly terrible. You do not want to do that. So here is the workaround. First of all, click on auto. Second, what we're gonna do is you're gonna go over here to the ISO range, and you're going to set this to either 50 to 100 or 50 to 200. Now just trust me on this. At first that may seem weird because usually at nighttime, we need at least 800 ISO, right? But set this to, I usually work with 50 to 100, and you're gonna click confirm. And then for the rest of the exposure settings, including shutter speed, you're going to keep this set to auto. Now right now it's of course a shutter speed of 1/500, but when it is dark at nighttime, that shutter speed is going to slow down. And with that interval at 30 seconds, the Pocket 3 will slow that shutter speed all the way down to a max of 30 seconds. And that is the workaround. As strange as it sounds, you have to have that set to auto for the shutter speed, and you have to put the ISO range to 50 to 100. I did try using the range in 50 to 800, and what I found is it had a lot more noise and grain in it, which I was surprised because ISO 800 is not necessarily that high. Yes, it is a small sensor, but it is 1 inch. But I also found the shutter speed, it would only take it up to about a max of 4 or 5 seconds. And that was not enough. The time lapse still ended up being too dark. So what you get with 50 to 100 is you get it to really bump those shutter speeds to a very slow value. And you end up getting a beautiful night lapse that does not have a lot of noise and grain, and it captured a lot of detail in the sky. There's a couple more settings you want to key in. For the white balance, I recommend setting that to a manual value. And I personally like 3800K at nighttime. That's a very good color for nighttime. So I recommend doing that. You can do auto, but what I found with auto is I found the white balance was jumping around throughout the night and it became very distracting and the night lapses did not look that great. So I recommend setting that static value. Down here for the format, I recommend doing video plus raw if there's any chance you want to edit those photos later on. I will say of all the testing that I did with this, with several night lapses, the ones that came straight out of camera with video were very much usable in projects. They looked really good, but I like to do video plus raw. And that's because with video plus raw, I get those .dng files and you can squeeze a little bit more out of them and you can really get incredible results. So if you like to do photo editing and you want to try doing the manual time lapse that way, I recommend at least doing that. That way you have those photos you can work with later on if you decide to. And then for the focus mode, I just keep this at continuous. The reason I do that is it really doesn't matter with the night lapse when the sky's far away. But if by chance the camera had a weird focus the first time I started it and I had it on single, like let's say it focused on a blade of grass or something like that, that could potentially ruin the entire night lapse because it could have the entirety of the sky blurry and that would obviously not be good. So I keep it on continuous. I haven't really ever had that problem with single, but I do keep it on continuous for that reason. And one other thing to mention, if you're like me and you have the Creator Combo, that comes with this wide angle lens right here. And this takes the focal length from 20 millimeters to 15 millimeters. And I sometimes like to use that with a night lapse. So I'm gonna pop it on right here and you'll see how that frame got wider. I do recommend considering using that because you will get more of the sky in your frame. And that's especially useful. It's good to have that wide angle at nighttime, and 20 millimeters to 15 millimeters is much wider. So I do recommend trying that out if you own it with the Creator Combo. If you don't, you can still get great results with the 20 millimeter, but this is just another tool in the tool chest if you own it. But that is it. Those are all the settings we need to key in. And once you've keyed those in, pick the framing. Obviously right here would not be a good spot for a night lapse unless you want to see the stars right through here between the trees. But pick your framing, start it recording, you're good to go. So now that you know how to capture amazing night lapses with your Pocket 3, it's time to get your Pocket 3 out there and capture some. And if you own the Pocket 3 and you'd like to learn more about how to get some incredible footage with the Pocket 3, check out this playlist right here.